So, after a comment thread on David Hewlett's YouTube channel, and you should go check it out because he's being all geeky and cool, and I sort of love him for that. He mentioned that it would be useful to have something to help someone who's trying to get back into D&D. He asked me if I had a podcast for that. I actually did have a review of D&D back in the day, but I have since lost the audio due to a computer failure. Yay me. Back up, kids. Back up everything. Keep this in mind. So this has inspired me to come up with a few episodes about D&D, in particular oriented towards people who have maybe been out of it for a while and want to get back in, or have kids that they want to introduce to it. And this will culminate in a nice big one about the history of Dungeons and Dragons, but that will take a little more work, so I'll probably do that on Thursday when I don't have work. So, here's the thing. Dungeons and Dragons has been around for a long time, and it has evolved. And this first episode here, I'm talking about D&D. I will be talking about sort of getting back into it, and to a certain extent, letting your kids get back into it. This will be the first part in a three-parter, I think. Anyways, Ramble. That's the name of it. Late Night Ramble. Anyways, D&D. D&D's been around for a long time. And if you've been out of it for years, some of the changes over time may be interesting for you. D&D, when it first started, was really born out of the whole wargaming movement. So it was very combat-oriented. Most of your challenges were related to combat. You had to fight certain kinds of monsters, maybe make some odd decisions, or do a trap thing, but ultimately it was go kill things and steal some loot. That's pretty cool. Actually, you can have a lot of fun doing that. But as D&D went on, they started to add things to give it more breadth. So not only are you, disarming traps and trying to go through these cool, maybe semi-physical challenges, they added along the way, slowly, from some early optional rules for first edition to some more expanded optional rules in second edition to full-on part of the game in third, 3.5, and fourth, and Pathfinder rules for using skills. And these are going to be one of the bigger changes that you notice if you try and get back into playing D&D after you've been out for a while. So that's one thing that you're going to want to look at, is putting together a game will also involve maybe figuring out how to use those skills sections. A lot of the other things will seem very familiar. There's still hit points, there's still levels, there's still classes, there's still races. All of that is pretty basic if you played it before. There have been changes. They've added some more races. They've added some more classes. A lot more classes, actually, in the various editions. Third edition had quite a few. Fourth edition had a whole lot. Fifth edition looks to be going back to stripping down back down to basics, but they'll slowly add classes and class options as they go along. Pathfinder, which is more like 3.5, also has a lot of class options. So you're going to find that there's more decisions to make. You're going to have more skills, you're going to have more classes, you're going to have more races, more things to pick from. And decision paralysis is a thing for some people. So you might want to just limit yourself to some basic books and just make the characters in a way that's much more familiar if you haven't been in it for a while. And then slowly add those other things as you get more familiar. Now, we're between editions right now. They're not making new books for 4th edition anymore. And 5th edition isn't out yet. When 5th edition comes out, they're going to release a PDF version as well as the books. This might be useful to you if you've not been in for a while and you aren't sure you want to spend all that money. You might check out that PDF. It'll have all the core rules. Now, the other thing that they'll be coming out with that you might want to check into is the starter set. And the starter set will help you get up through level 5. No problem. You don't make characters. It's more, here's your pre-generated characters, here's an adventure, and play through. Here are all the rules you need, and this is how you learn how to play. Now, this will be probably very useful if you've got a kid and you're trying to introduce them to playing, or if you're just, not comfortable with getting into it on your own. Definitely a possibility. Now, the other thing that I would sort of, address on changes in a broad level, they have gone back and forth over the years over the use of miniatures. Some versions of the game have been very miniature-centric, and other versions of the game have not. 5th edition apparently is moving more towards the theater of the mind type games, or at least making a lot more room for it. Theater of the mind is where you sit around and talk about what happens. You don't have miniatures, you're just describing it. If you played in an edition where miniatures were heavy, that may take some getting used to. If you played in a version that was theater of the mind heavy, the miniatures might take some getting used to. That said, if you have a kid, miniatures are kind of awesome for them, because they look at them and they have something they can play with, something they can work on. You can teach them how to paint, and it, adds an extra level to the hobby for them. So you might want to look at that. Now, the thing with D&D is you can describe it like it's a video game, and a lot of kids will get that. But ultimately, you're going to want to be able to have an example. Some place to sort of see how it's played and get into a group of people. Playing D&D with just you and one other person can be off a bit. For one thing, the rules don't really support solo play a lot of the time. And for another, the whole point is it's social. You're sitting around a table with a bunch of people. So you may want to find a group, not just for your kid if you want your kid to play, but for yourself. If you want to get back into playing D&D, you need to find a group. Now there are a lot of ways to find groups. For example, most game stores, and there are game stores in most major cities, have organized play, where you can show up and play a game. And really, it's that simple. You show up and you say, hey, I want to play a game. They'll usually have some pre-gens on hand if you don't have something handy. And they'll have game masters looking to run a set of pre-published adventures from the publisher to help, get people involved. Show up to the game store, find out when the nights are that they play, and see about finding somebody to get in with. It's really pretty simple to do it that way. You could also use something like Meetup and see if you can find people in your area that'd be interested in getting together and playing, even if you don't have a local game store that you want to check out. Actually, going to a local game store will be an experience for a lot of people, especially if you haven't played in a long time, because you go in and you can be almost overwhelmed with all this awesome sort of geeky stuff. There were game stores when 2 decades ago, to be sure, but the industry was a lot more narrow. It's a lot more broad now. There's a lot more variety in the type of games out there. So you can actually discover a lot of new and interesting things at those game stores. They've also, at least a lot of them, not all of them unfortunately, but a lot of them become much more welcoming of people from backgrounds that aren't always associated with gaming. You know, more women gamers are they're trying to make an environment much more welcoming to women gamers and so on, to try and make it an inclusive environment rather than a bunch of guys sitting in their garage playing on a Saturday night. And so, my recommendation is, of course, go and check it out. Now, I'm going to close on this final point, and next episode I'll concentrate more on some ideas on how to help kids out, because I don't have kids, but I've seen a lot of different options in that realm, and, well, I was a kid once. I started playing when I was 9, so I have some ideas on that, but I'll get into that in the next episode. One thing that you want to consider at this point, because we are between editions, is do you want to wait until the next edition, or do you want to start now? You can play D&D with any edition. You don't need the new edition. You don't need the new books. You've got a bunch of second edition books, play second edition. If you don't have a bunch of second edition books, go to a local used bookstore. You will find them. The gaming section at a used bookstore invariably has a large selection of previous editions of D&D, as well as modules, supplements, all sorts of things. It's a great way to pick up the game. But you need to figure out which edition you want to get into. Do you want to get into the one that you're familiar with? Yeah, I mean, there's, like I said, if you've got second edition books, you can always just pick up the second edition books and run with it. Or do you want to, try something a little more modern, a little newer? Like I said, they'll be at the used bookstore. You can find them. There is an edition that is current. There are 2 editions that are current. There's 4th edition, but they're not publishing anything for it. But you can find a lot of the books out there, and it's an easy game to get into. The other one that's current is Pathfinder. Now, Pathfinder is not technically D&D, but it's D&D. When they moved from third edition, actually 3.5, into 4th edition, a bunch of people really liked 3.5, and they said, no, we don't want to give it up. And because of the way they had set up the licensing on D&D 3.5, they were allowed to sort of make their own game. So they did. They made Pathfinder. And Pathfinder is really popular. It's in fact so popular that they have their own organized play. They have an MMO that's in the works. It's a very popular edition of the game. You might check it out. 4th edition, a lot of fun. It may feel very strange because they made a lot of interesting and challenging changes in 4th edition to sort of optimize what they think D&D should have been. And some people didn't like them and some of them did. I like them, but I can understand why people who maybe haven't played in a while will find it deeply unfamiliar. If you are going to get into 4th edition, pick up the Essentials books. And if you go to a game store, they will be able to tell you what an essential book is. It's a much smaller book. They are much more streamlined. They've knocked out a lot of the kinks in the system to make it easier for you to play. Anyways, that's my advice, my first bit of advice episode for getting back into D&D. My next one, I'm going to concentrate more on the whole trying to get your kids involved. And I may be consulting with some of my friends who have kids. And, of course, some of my own experience and some blogs and such to make it a little more informed. But hopefully this is helpful. And you'll show up for the next couple, and that will be helpful as well. Anyways, that's my ramble tonight about getting back into D&D. I'll talk to you later. Bye.